They thought she was too old to fight back. At her checkup, her son said, "She's just waiting to die." What he didn't know, she was already planning their disinheritance. This isn't her ending, it's her reckoning. They always say you'll remember the moment your world shifts, that it'll imprint itself like a fingerprint, sharp, undeniable. I used to think those moments came with impact. The shatter of glass, the scream of tires, the piercing ring of a phone in the dead of night. But when it happened to me, it arrived quietly, casually, in a beige doctor's office that smelled like antiseptic and artificial lavender. Colton was fiddling with his phone. Harper sat stiffly next to him, scrolling through emails. Gavin hadn't come at all. "Busy," he'd said, though I hadn't even asked. I was grateful in a bitter way. At least he wasn't pretending. My doctor, Dr. Brandt, was summarizing my blood work. Cholesterol a little high, blood pressure stable, bone density still holding. The usual check-in script. I sat there, nodding politely, my sweater clutched too tightly in my lap. And then, just like that, Colton glanced up from his phone and said with a dry chuckle, "She's just waiting to die anyway." It took a second for the room to catch up to the words. Dr. Brandt's pen hovered midair. Harper froze, her mouth slightly parted, her email forgotten. I sat there, my ears ringing, breath caught halfway up my throat. The silence was thick, uncomfortable, stretching far too long. Colton didn't even blink. I felt it before I understood it. The tightening in my chest, the heat crawling up my neck, the icy stab at the base of my skull. My vision clouded, not like fainting, more like retreating. The kind of fog your mind forms when it wants to hide. He didn't mean for me to hear it, I think. Or maybe he did. Maybe that was the point. I made it through the rest of the appointment on autopilot, nodding when I was supposed to, forcing out a few thin-lipped smiles. Colton went back to texting. Harper asked for a copy of the results, as if she were the one managing my health, as if I couldn't possibly comprehend my own body anymore. On the drive home, I stared out the window, while Colton talked about property taxes. His voice buzzed in the background like a faulty radio. I didn't say a word. When they dropped me off, Colton kissed the top of my head like I was a child, like nothing had happened. Inside, the house was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the table, still wearing my coat, purse still on my arm. The silence inside me was louder than anything around me. That one sentence kept repeating in my head like a taunt. She's just waiting to die anyway. I replayed it again and again, like a wound I couldn't stop prodding. What did he mean? Did he think I didn't hear him? Or worse, did he think I wouldn't care? I used to think Colton was my rock. After Richard died, he stepped in almost immediately. He helped manage the finances, took over home repairs, called daily. He told me I didn't have to worry about anything. "You just focus on healing, Mom," he'd said. Back then, I thought it was love. Now, I wasn't so sure. I remembered how he insisted I give him power of attorney, just in case. How he'd encouraged me to sell Richard's old car, the one I liked driving, and insisted I didn't need all that space when he pushed for me to move into a retirement condo. I remembered how he'd laughed when I mentioned taking a painting class. "You're gonna start a new hobby now?" The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. Because if I saw them, what did that say about me? About the mother I'd been, about the love I'd poured into raising them. Endless school lunches, PTA meetings, band recitals, heartbreaks, scraped knees, whispered prayers at night when they were sick. Had all of that meant so little that now they could sit next to me in a doctor's office and joke about my death? I stood up, knees aching more than usual, and shuffled toward the bathroom. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. 63. Widow. Still had laugh lines when I smiled, though I hadn't done much of that lately. The woman looking back at me was unfamiliar, tired, distant, almost translucent. A woman fading at the edges. Was that what they saw? The silent scream inside me clawed at my throat. I didn't let it out. I couldn't help flashing back to when Colton was 10 years old. Richard had just passed. The funeral was small, understated, just how Richard would have wanted. I remember sitting on the floor of the laundry room, sobbing quietly, thinking I'd finally broken in private. But then Colton had come in. He wrapped his small arms around me and said, "It's okay, Mom. I'll take care of you." I'd held on to those words like a life raft. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I taught him that love meant control, that stepping into his father's role meant he owned me. I sat down on the edge of my bed, unzipped my boots with shaking fingers, and stared at the floor for a long time. My mind wandered, uninvited, to Harper. She'd always been more distant, polite, efficient. Everything about her was sharp: her tone, her wardrobe, her eyes. She called often enough, sent flowers on holidays, but she'd never truly looked at me, not since she turned 15 and slammed her bedroom door shut on the world. And Gavin, sweet, quiet Gavin, always floating in the background. Never wanted to be in the middle, never fought, never sided. He used silence like a shield, but silence is just another form of permission, isn't it? I closed my eyes and breathed in deep. My chest still felt tight, like the air was too thick to pull down. The doctor had said everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal, not anymore. I had spent decades mothering them, sacrificing, enduring, swallowing my needs whole so theirs could bloom. And now they watched me like I was some antique they didn't know what to do with. Fragile, inconvenient, waiting to die. But I wasn't dying. Not yet. That night I sat at the kitchen table and opened a blank notebook. The first in a long time. I picked up a pen and wrote just one sentence. I heard him. Then I underlined it. Twice. I didn't know what the rest of the story would be. Not yet. But I knew this was the beginning. Not of my end, but of something else entirely. When I stepped back inside the house, it didn't feel like mine anymore. The door closed behind me with a soft thud, but the silence that followed was so full it almost had weight. I stood in the entryway, my fingers still curled around the doorknob, as if I needed something to ground me. The air was stale, leftover perfume, cleaning products, something metallic I couldn't place. Everything looked exactly the same, but nothing felt familiar. It wasn't just the house that had changed. I had changed. I walked through the living room slowly, running my fingers along the back of the couch, the edge of the fireplace, the picture frames on the wall, photographs of birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, all carefully arranged, perfect smiles, posed arms, and behind them now, shadows. I paused in front of one from Gavin's high school graduation. Harper stood beside him, her hands clasped in front, polished and elegant even then. Colton's arm was around my shoulder, and I remember thinking how proud I was, how lucky. But now, staring at that photo, all I could see was Harper's tight-lipped smile, the way Gavin looked off camera, and Colton. God, his hand looked possessive, like he owned the moment, owned me. I moved into the kitchen and found the last birthday card they'd given me, propped against the fruit bowl. Bright flowers on the front, cheerful script inside. To the strongest woman we know, love always, your kids. No signatures, no personal messages. Just the collective, distant, your kids. I listened to my voicemails, one after another. Harper. Hey, just checking in. Let me know if you need anything. Colton. Thought I'd remind you to take your meds. Did you refill that prescription? Gavin. Hope you're okay, Mom. Let me know. Each voice like a note struck out of tune. I hadn't noticed it before, the way they spoke to me like I was already halfway gone. Instructions, reminders, distance. There was a time when I believed all of it was love. But now I saw it. Performative care, obligation masked as affection, convenience disguised as connection. I sat at the dining table, opened my journal, and wrote, "They see me as a task." The pen hovered for a moment, then I wrote again, "Not a mother, a responsibility." Harper had always been the golden one. She made straight A's, got into Dartmouth, wore her ambition like a tailored coat. Even as a child, she kept her distance, hugged only when prompted, spoke only when necessary. I used to tell myself it was just her personality, that some people showed love differently. But I don't remember the last time she touched me, really touched me. She sends gifts, always elegant, expensive. A cashmere scarf for Christmas, lavender lotion for Mother's Day. Things I don't need, wrapped in silence. Her emails are timely, formal. Hope this finds you well. Never, how are you? And Gavin, he's always been the quiet one. My sweet, thoughtful boy. But he learned early to stay on the sidelines, to keep the peace. He doesn't argue, he doesn't challenge, he just disappears. He calls, sometimes, always polite, always brief. But his voice is a closed door, safe, impersonal. They love me, I suppose. in the way one might love an old lamp passed down through generations. Familiar, functional, replaceable. I found myself in Richard's old study, though I hadn't stepped foot in there for months. The room still smelled of his cologne, faintly preserved in the fabric of the armchair. His books lined the shelves, economics, politics, theology, all hardback, all untouched since the day he passed. There, on the desk, I saw it. A folder, tucked neatly under a stack of tax forms. I almost didn't notice it, but something about the corner peeking out caught my attention. My name was on it. I opened it slowly. It was a draft estate plan, newly printed, dated just a month ago, with Colton's name at the top and mine at the center. Power of attorney, advance healthcare directive, property trust assignments. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling. Legal language, assumptions. It was clear Colton had begun preparing, without telling me. It read as if I were already gone, or too incompetent to understand. My breath caught, the room tilted. He was making plans, not with me, for me. I staggered back to the chair and sat down, paper crumpled in my lap. My heart thudded so loud I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't concern, this wasn't love, this was control. I thought back to the day Richard died, sudden, a heart attack in his sleep. I was 49. My career had just begun to bloom. I'd taken a part-time position teaching art at the community college, thinking it was finally my time. After years of diapers and late-night science fair projects, I thought I'd finally earned space for myself. And then, gone. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye. The next morning, I quit, sold my kiln, packed up my studio. The children needed me. The house needed me. There was always something else to do, someone else to care for. I told myself it was the right choice, that I was being strong. But the truth was simpler. I didn't think I was allowed to want more. I wrote again in my journal. I vanished for them. They don't even notice I'm gone. The disorientation was deepening. The walls of this house, once warm, now echoed with voices that no longer felt real. Harper's brisk tones, Colton's confidence, Gavin's silence. I got up and wandered to the hallway. The family photos stared down at me like ghosts. My reflection in the glass looked hollow. I touched one frame gently, me holding all three of them as babies on a worn-out couch. I was smiling, they were screaming, but even then, I looked content, like I believed it was worth it. Did they? I stepped into my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and clutched the folder to my chest. The betrayal stung deeper than I expected, not just because of the planning, but because of what it meant. They had written me off. Quietly, neatly, without malice, just efficiency. That was the worst part. It wasn't hate. It was indifference. I opened the journal again, flipped to a blank page. This time I didn't write just one line. I was never supposed to disappear. I just did what I thought was love. But love doesn't erase you. Love doesn't plot your absence. Love doesn't plan the end of your story without asking if you're finished living it. The page trembled under my hand. My throat ached, but I kept writing. They cared enough to manage my life, but not enough to ask if I wanted to live it. I closed the journal gently, placed it beside the estate folder, and leaned back against the pillows. The house creaked around me, floorboards whispering old stories I didn't want to hear anymore. In the stillness, I knew one thing with sudden clarity. This wasn't my home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that truth. I was angry. And underneath the anger, something else. A flicker. A spark. The beginning of a different kind of fire. There are parts of myself I buried so deep I forgot where they were planted. Before Richard, before the children, before the decades of dinners and laundry and careful silence, there was just me. A girl who wanted to build things. I used to sketch buildings in the margins of my notebooks, whole cities designed in ballpoint pen. I told my high school counselor I wanted to study architecture. He patted my hand and said, "That's ambitious. You'd make a lovely teacher." I met Richard 2 years later at a mutual friend's wedding. He was older, confident, magnetic in that way that draws you in before you notice the undertow. He asked me about my dreams and laughed, not cruelly, just lightly, when I said I wanted to design houses. "You'll have a beautiful one someday," he said. "Why build someone else's when you can build a life with me?" It didn't feel like dismissal then. It felt like romance. We married fast. I was 22, fresh out of community college, still thinking life would somehow unfold on its own, like one of those stories where the heroine gets everything because she's good and patient and kind. But real life doesn't reward silence. It feeds off of it. Richard didn't forbid me from working. He just made it unnecessary. "I make enough for both of us," he'd say whenever I mentioned a job. "Besides, who's going to keep the home steady?" When I brought up going back to school, he'd smile and say, "Don't stress yourself, sweetheart. That's for girls who don't have a good man to take care of them." It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it, with warmth, assurance, like he was doing me a favor. At first I believed him. He had this way of making everything sound like common sense. My place was at home, not by force, but by design. He'd leave the newspaper open to articles about daycare horror stories. He'd praise me for the way I folded his shirts, just right. He'd tell friends at dinner parties, "She's the glue holding us all together." And everyone would nod, like that was enough. Like being glue was a calling. When Colton was born, Richard lit up. A son, his heir, his mirror. He carried him around like a trophy at first, then molded him like clay. "Strong men lead," he'd say, bouncing baby Colton on his knee. "And weak men follow women." I should have heard the warning in that. When Harper came along, Richard was pleased, but never proud. He loved her, of course he did. But not the way he loved Colton. Not the way he bent to his smallest whim or indulged his tantrums or excused his arrogance with, "Boys will be boys." Harper learned quickly to earn approval through excellence. Straight A's, perfect posture, never a hair out of place. Richard admired her, but he didn't nurture her, and she, in turn, didn't ask to be nurtured. By the time Gavin was born, Richard was already losing interest in parenting. He was traveling more, managing more. He'd come home and pat Gavin's head like he was a pet. Gavin learned to keep quiet, to blend in. He became the silence between his siblings, the calm in the storm, the one who watched everything and said nothing. I remember standing at the kitchen sink once, maybe 5 years into the marriage, watching a plane cross the sky. I imagined what it would be like to be on it, to be anyone other than who I was. I had an old architectural magazine hidden in the linen closet, under the tablecloths. I'd pull it out sometimes, late at night, and trace the lines of the buildings with my fingers. I told myself it wasn't too late. That maybe once the kids were older, I'd go back. But Richard always knew how to close doors with compliments. "God, I don't know how you do it all," he'd say. "This family would fall apart without you." And I believed him. I thought that was power. I see it now. How I measured my worth by my absence. The fewer needs I had, the better I was. If I was tired, it meant I was doing it right. If I was invisible, it meant I was strong. My mother was the same. I remember her brushing her hair at the vanity every night in silence, her eyes unfocused in the mirror. She never raised her voice, never argued. When my father spoke, she listened. When he drank too much, she cleaned up. When he forgot her birthday, she smiled anyway. She used to tell me, "A good woman doesn't make waves." And I spent my whole life believing that. It's strange how obedience can look so much like devotion when you've never known anything else. Richard died in his sleep at 52, just didn't wake up. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at him, waiting for his chest to rise again. When it didn't, I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just got up, made coffee, and called the coroner. I'd spent so long preparing to be without him, the loss felt almost mechanical. Colton stepped in the very next day, called the bank, managed the funeral arrangements, took the lead like his father taught him. "Don't worry about a thing, Mom," he said. "I've got you." And just like that, the pattern resumed. I didn't go back to school, didn't travel, didn't start the art classes I'd once dreamed about. I baked, I organized closets, I volunteered at church, I visited Harper at her law firm, sent Gavin care packages in college. I let Colton talk over me in every financial decision. I let them all believe I was content because that's what they needed from me. But now I see it clearly. I didn't choose that life. I surrendered to it. And the cost was my selfhood. I'm sitting at my desk now, journal open in front of me, the same pen trembling between my fingers. I wrote, "Obedience is not love. It's fear in a prettier dress." The words came fast after that. I was raised to be small. I married into silence. And now I live in the shell of choices I didn't make. I look at the woman I've become, not bitter but emptied, a vessel for everyone else's needs. And I see my mother. That realization punches harder than I expected. But it also wakes something in me. Because if I have followed her footsteps this far, maybe I'm the one who gets to stop walking now. Maybe I get to turn around. Maybe obedience ends with me. The roast was overcooked. I knew it as soon as I opened the oven door, but I didn't care enough to fix it. The smell filled the house. Rosemary and garlic, just like Richard liked it. Old habits. They die last. I laid out the plates, polished the silverware, lit the candles like I always had. The table looked beautiful. It always did. That was never the problem. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. Colton first, punctual as a sermon. He brought a bottle of wine I didn't ask for and walked in like he still owned the place. "Smells great, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Hope you didn't go to too much trouble." Harper followed, perfect as ever. Tight blazer, minimal makeup, purse worth more than my car. She handed me a small square box. "For the table," she said. Inside was a crystal napkin holder. It was heavy, cold. Gavin arrived last, headphones still around his neck, phone glowing in his hand. He muttered a hello and sat without looking up. We ate in silence for the first few minutes. The knives scraped against the plates. The roast was dry, and no one said a word about it. I watched them chew, swallow, avoid eye contact. "So," Colton began, setting down his fork with theatrical delicacy, "how's everything been lately?" I knew that tone. Warm but rehearsed. Concern laced with calculation. "Fine," I said, quiet. Harper glanced at my dress, a soft burgundy cotton thing I'd worn countless times before. She tilted her head. "You know, Mom, that color kind of washes you out. Maybe we should take you shopping. Something more lively." I smiled thinly. "I like this one." She shrugged and went back to her plate. "Just a thought." Gavin cleared his throat and pulled his phone closer to his lap as if it might shield him. Colton leaned forward, folding his hands like a man about to make a business proposal. "I've been thinking with everything going on, and I don't mean to alarm you, but maybe it's time to start discussing next steps." I set down my glass. "Next steps?" "You know," he said with a nervous chuckle. "Just future stuff. Long-term care, assisted living, that kind of thing." Harper jumped in. "There are really nice places now, Mom, not like the ones from years ago. They've got art rooms, walking paths, one even has a saltwater pool." Colton nodded. "Exactly. And it's not just about comfort, it's about security, legal protections, power of attorney." I stared at them. They looked so at ease, so organized, like they'd practiced this. Gavin didn't say a word. I felt something rupture inside me, not loud, not dramatic, just a small tear, a fray. I looked at Colton's plate, half finished. His fork sat crooked across the rim. Harper's wineglass was smudged with her lipstick, untouched since she poured it. Gavin's napkin was still folded on his lap, pristine. The clock on the wall ticked, sharp, loud, like a countdown. I smiled. It wasn't kind. "I see," I said quietly. Colton pressed on. "No one's saying anything has to happen right away, but it's better to plan ahead. You know that." "When did I become a contingency?" I asked. He blinked. "What?" "A risk to be managed." No one answered. My hands were folded in my lap, gripping each other until my knuckles turned white. "I raised you," I whispered. "All of you. I fed you, drove you, held your hands through sickness and heartbreak. And now you sit at my table and talk about moving me out like I'm an appliance that's outlived its usefulness." Harper sighed. "Mom, you're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being observant." Gavin looked up then, just for a second, and then back to his phone. Colton sat back in his chair, suddenly defensive. "We're just trying to help." "You're trying to manage," I said. "There's a difference." The candles flickered. The clock ticked. The roast grew colder. I stood. "I'm tired," I said. "I think I'll turn in." Colton looked surprised. "But we just got here." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." I didn't wait for them to respond. I walked down the hallway, past the photos, past the memories. I closed my bedroom door and locked it. And then I sank to the floor. I didn't cry like I had as a young woman, no sobs, no heaving. It was quieter, heavier, a soundless unraveling. I pressed my forehead to my knees, and let the weight of it all settle. The betrayal, the disconnection, the ache of being seen not as a mother, not even as a woman, but as a problem to be solved. When did they stop seeing me as a person? The question pulsed in my head, louder than the clock, louder than my breath. I crawled into bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. By morning, they were gone. The table was cleared, the wine corked. A sticky note on the fridge read, "Let us know what you decide. Love, Colton." I stared at it for a long time. Then, I did something I never thought I would. I opened the junk drawer, pulled out the old digital recorder I used during my community board meetings, and placed it on the kitchen counter. I checked the batteries. It still worked. The next day, I invited them over again, said I'd thought about things, that I wanted to hear them out. They came. Harper with a notepad, Colton with a laptop, Gavin with his phone. I set the recorder under a dish towel, hit record, sat down and let them talk. And talk they did. Colton laughed at one point. "She's so easy to steer. I swear she still thinks she's calling the shots." Harper snorted. "She'll do whatever you say. Just keep it framed like you're worried about her blood pressure." Gavin muttered something that got them both laughing. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. Then Harper said it. "If we don't do something soon, she's going to start thinking she's got options. We need to get ahead of this before she starts making things difficult." Colton chimed in. "I mean, how hard is it to get someone into a facility these days? Don't they have those emergency clauses?" They laughed. They laughed. I turned off the recorder with a calm I didn't recognize in myself. I had what I needed. Not to fight, not to argue, but to remember. To never again forget exactly who I was dealing with. They weren't my children anymore. They were strangers. It started with a sweater, soft teal, hand-knit, loose around the shoulders, nothing extraordinary. But when I slipped it over my head, I felt different. Not younger, not better. Just mine. I'd found it tucked away in a cedar chest, buried under blankets and memories, and something about the texture made me hold it tighter than I meant to. I wore it to the grocery store. Just that, no makeup, no jewelry, hair up in a messy bun. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I needed to shrink to fit the role they had cast me in. From there, the changes began to unfold like petals after frost. I donated 3 bags of clothes, sweater sets in pastel tones, slacks Harper once complimented, sensible shoes Colton insisted were better for my arches. Gone. I replaced them with soft cotton dresses, bright scarves, boots that made noise when I walked. I wanted to be seen again, not as an aging woman, not as someone's mother, but as myself. One afternoon, while digging through old files looking for the deed to the house, I found a yellowed envelope with my maiden name written in loopy cursive, Elaine Whitmore. My breath caught. Elaine, my roommate in college, my wild-haired, unfiltered, fiercely alive friend. We'd lost touch somewhere between diapers and dinner duty, but seeing her name again sparked something electric inside me. I found her number online, heart thumping as I dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Is this Elaine Whitmore? Well, maybe you go by something else now." "Is this Lillian Hart?" she replied, her voice exactly the same. Husky, half laughing, impossible to forget. We met at a cafe downtown 2 days later. I wore a scarf that didn't match anything and lipstick that hadn't touched my face since Richard's funeral. Elaine walked in like a storm, flaming red bob, oversized sunglasses, high-heeled boots clicking like punctuation. "God," she said, enveloping me in a vanilla-scented hug, "you look exactly like yourself." We talked for hours. I laughed harder than I'd let myself in years. About nothing. About everything. When I told her what Colton had said at the doctor's office, her face darkened. "You raised them," she said, stirring her cappuccino with unnecessary force. "But you didn't create their cruelty." I let that sentence settle. It echoed inside me louder than any apology I hadn't received. That week, I booked my first therapy session. Dr. Meredith Klein, soft-spoken but sharp, with a lopsided smile and piercing questions. I didn't know what I expected, but when she asked, "What brought you here?" I answered without hesitation, "I don't think they love me." Not really. And then the dam broke. We spoke of motherhood, grief, duty, and the hollowness that came after decades of being what everyone else needed. I told her about Richard, how he never yelled, never hit, but how I still shrunk around him. I told her about Colton's voice, Harper's ice, Gavin's silence. Dr. Klein nodded slowly. Abuse doesn't have to scream to leave bruises. The sessions peeled back layers I didn't know were there. Guilt like a second skin, neglect I'd rationalized, the way I'd disappeared, inch by inch, in exchange for affection that was always conditional. I started journaling again, not the cautious, clean entries I'd kept before, but raw, unfiltered truths. I bought a new leather-bound notebook and titled it with bold strokes on the first page. What I would have said. To Richard, to my children, to myself. The first entry read, "You taught me that love was earned, not given. I believed you. I wish I hadn't." Each day I wrote more. Some days were angry. Others were so quiet they bled into blank space. But the act of writing, of giving voice to the woman buried under decades of service, was sacred. The house began to feel different. Lighter. I rearranged the furniture, took down the family portraits from the hallway and replaced them with watercolor prints, oceans, skies, wildflowers, things that didn't demand anything from me. I played music in the mornings, loud, messy, jazz, folk, songs Richard would have called noise. I danced barefoot while making breakfast. I opened windows just because I could. One evening, after folding laundry and sipping tea, I walked past the hallway mirror. I stopped. At first, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her hair had silvered more than I remembered. Her shoulders weren't as straight, but her eyes were different. Not tired, not vacant, alive. I stepped closer, watching her, watching me. And then I whispered it out loud. "There you are." I placed my hand against the glass. It wasn't a grand transformation. No makeover montage, no sweeping score. But it was real. I wasn't healed, not yet. Maybe never fully. But I was no longer hiding. No longer waiting to be rescued. No longer ashamed of wanting something, anything, for myself. I was becoming. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was beginning to be. The law office smelled like old paper and pine-scented cleaner. Neutral walls, polished furniture, glass shelves lined with leather-bound legal codes. It was clinical, but not cold, which was more than I expected. Samuel Quinn was younger than I anticipated, mid-40s maybe, tall, calm, with a pair of glasses he didn't need but wore anyway. He smiled like someone who understood grief, but didn't let it run the show. "You must be Lillian," he said, extending his hand. "Please, come in. I brewed fresh coffee." I didn't take the coffee. My hands were already trembling. "I want to make a new will," I said, voice low, steady. He gestured toward a seat across from his desk. "We can absolutely do that. Can I ask what's prompting the update?" I hesitated. A dozen lies passed through my mind, simpler explanations, but I didn't come here to lie. "My children," I said. "They're not who I thought they were." He nodded once. Didn't press. "Tell me what you want." I sat down, folded my hands in my lap. "I want to remove them. From everything." He adjusted his glasses, not surprised. "Okay. Do you have specific beneficiaries in mind?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I don't want them to be entitled to anything, especially not control over me." Samuel leaned back. "We can structure your estate to reflect that. Do you want to designate a trustee?" "I don't trust any of them with that kind of power," I said. "Maybe a professional?" He tapped a few keys on his keyboard. "That's absolutely possible. We can appoint an independent fiduciary, someone with no personal ties. It's more costly, but it removes conflict of interest." Perfect. The next hour was paperwork and precision. Medical directives, trust clauses, contingency disbursements. I nodded through most of it, still unsure if I was doing the right thing, or if I'd simply waited too long to make it right. Samuel paused at one point, watching me over the rim of his glasses. "You're carrying guilt," he said gently. "Want to talk about it?" I took a breath. "It's just, they're my children. No matter what they've done, it feels like betrayal." He folded his hands thoughtful. "Ms. Hart," he said, "you're not burning the bridge. You're reclaiming the land it was built on." That stopped me. He continued. "People think estate planning is about punishment or reward. It's not. It's about autonomy, about deciding who holds your story when you can't tell it anymore." I stared at the document in front of me. My name, my future. The clean slate I thought I'd never be brave enough to demand. "Then let's do it," I whispered. Let's begin. By the end of the meeting, we had a draft. Everything redirected to a charitable trust in my name, focused on education grants for women over 50 returning to school. No family control, no access, no loopholes. A week later, the final documents arrived in a cream envelope. I signed every page with a pen that had belonged to Richard, just for the irony. When it was done, I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. Quiet, deep, unshakable relief. That night, I wrote 3 letters by hand. One to Colton. You mistook my silence for permission. It never was. One to Harper. Your detachment isn't strength. It's fear in heels. And one to Gavin. You watched. You didn't stop them. That hurts the most. I didn't write to shame them. I wrote so they'd never get to rewrite my story, so they'd know I saw them clearly, finally. Each letter was sealed, stamped, and placed in the fireproof box with the will. My legacy would not be theirs to distort. Later, I walked into Richard's old study. It hadn't changed. The same dark furniture, the same dust on the shelves. The original will sat in the top drawer, just as I'd left it, signed and witnessed, written 10 years ago. Everything to the kids, to Colton as executor. I held the papers in my hands, felt their weight. Then I ripped them down the middle, and then again, and again, until they were nothing but shreds. I burned the pieces in the fireplace, watching the flames lick away the last tie to the life I thought I was meant to live. As the embers dimmed, the house felt different. Lighter, not fixed, but claimed. I didn't expect the knock on the door. It was nearly midnight. I froze, heart stuttering. I opened it cautiously, expecting Colton, but it was Gavin. He stood on the porch, hoodie pulled tight, face pale under the porch light. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without a word. He didn't sit, just hovered near the edge of the couch, eyes scanning the floor. "I know about the recorder," he said. I didn't move. I heard them. That day you invited us back. I came in late and stayed outside the door. I waited. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to do, he admitted. And then I saw your face when they left. I should have said something. I should have told you. I'm not like them. I don't want to be like them. There was a silence. Then I spoke, quiet and even. You didn't stop them. He nodded. It wasn't a reconciliation, not a healing, but maybe the first crack in the wall. After he left, I sat in the quiet again. But this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was peace. And it was mine. The mask was soft at first. It looked like love, felt like purpose. It came in the form of warm bottles at midnight, Band-Aids with cartoon faces, whispered lullabies to ward off night terrors. It came with scraped knees and feverish foreheads pressed to mine. I wore it proudly then, the good mother, the capable one, the constant. But over time, the mask hardened. It cracked under expectations, then sealed over again with more silence. It became part of my skin. Now, sitting alone in the sunlit kitchen, watching steam curl from my mug, I wondered who I had been underneath it all. What had been left of me while I became everything to everyone else? Was I their mother or their shadow? I thought of Colton's tantrums as a boy, how Richard had praised his leadership when he shouted at his siblings, how I had hushed Harper's questions about fairness, how Gavin would flinch when voices rose, how I had told them over and over, "It's fine." He didn't mean it, because I didn't know what else to say. I remembered Harper's heartbreak at 15, the boy who left her after prom. She cried in my lap, and I told her she'd be okay because that's what I was supposed to say. But I never told her it was okay to not be okay. I never told her I'd felt that kind of pain too. I remembered Gavin, at 8 years old, standing frozen in the kitchen doorway while Richard scolded him for dropping a glass. The sound of it shattering still lives somewhere in me. I had stepped in, but not enough. Never enough. The memory of Gavin's voice from just a week earlier came back to me. I didn't know how to be louder than them. Neither did I. Motherhood had taught me to absorb, to endure, to justify. But it never taught me how to protect myself from the slow erosion of my own identity. No one prepares you for the loneliness that blooms when your children see you only as a function, not a person. Gavin came by again on a Thursday afternoon. He didn't call first, just knocked once and waited. I opened the door, and for a long moment, we didn't say anything. "Hi," he said. I nodded. Come in. He carried a paper bag with 2 sandwiches and a bottle of sweet tea. I thought maybe we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table. It was strange having him there, without his phone, without distractions. Just my son, just the boy I once held through chickenpox and nightmares. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said. I didn't interrupt. I was a coward, he admitted. I watched them treat you like a burden. I let it happen. You were quiet, I said. But you weren't cruel. But that's the thing, he said, eyes shining. Silence is cruelty. Just slower. Just safer for the person being silent. My throat tightened. I kept telling myself I was keeping the peace, he continued. But peace for who? For me? While you were getting erased? The words hung between us, raw and unfiltered. I don't want to be part of that anymore, he said, not even by accident. I reached across the table. My hand found his, smaller than I remembered, warmer than I expected. We sat like that for a while, no need for language, just fingers holding history. I thought, I whispered, that if I gave enough, they'd always see me. Gavin nodded. You gave too much. You disappeared. I wiped a tear from the corner of my eye. I didn't know any other way. You do now. It was our first hug in years, not a Hallmark hug, not clean or easy. It was a hug of salt and breath and trembling bones, a hug that said I'm sorry without needing to say it out loud. We didn't solve anything, but for the first time, it felt like we started something. After he left, I went to my bedroom and stood in front of the mirror again, the same mirror I had stood before weeks earlier, unsure of the woman staring back, but now she looked more solid, wiser, real. I was rewriting the story. Finally, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my journal. Motherhood, I wrote, is not martyrdom. It is not submission. It is not silence. It is love, but love is not slavery. I was taught to wear sacrifice like a crown. I wore it so long it bent my neck. But I'm more than the meals I made, the hands I held, the pain I swallowed. I'm more than their version of me. I let the pen fall. It was the first time I truly believed it. That night, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars appear one by one. I thought about the years I'd spent waiting for them to notice me, to appreciate me, to save me. But that was never their job. It was mine. I let go then of the myth I had clung to for decades. The myth that a mother's love must endure all things, even abuse, even neglect, even betrayal. That kind of love isn't love. It's erasure. And I was done disappearing. The first thing I took down was the wedding photo. It had hung in the foyer since Richard and I moved in, black and white, formally posed, me in lace, him in charcoal gray. I used to glance at it each time I passed, not out of sentiment, but obligation. Habit, like checking the mirror on your way out the door just to make sure you still exist. I unhooked the frame, cradled the weight in my hands. For a moment I stood there staring at the smiling strangers inside. Then I set it gently in a box labeled Donate. The next day the walls began to change. Family portraits disappeared one by one. In their place, watercolor landscapes I'd painted in the early mornings. My first attempts were shaky, uneven, but they were mine. I thumbtacked a map above the kitchen counter and circled destinations in red pen: Santa Fe, Portland, Bar Harbor, places I'd only seen in travel magazines, places I was determined to meet in person. The house breathed differently now. I opened windows wide, even when it was cold. Let the air sweep through the rooms, let the stale years scatter like dust. I rolled up rugs, peeled off wallpaper, painted the hallway a soft sage green. I bought wildflowers for no one but myself. I filled the rooms with color and light. Then came Richard's desk, heavy mahogany, ornate legs, too large for the study, too dark for the room. It had been his domain, tax files, legal pads, clipped pens, everything in its place. After he died, Colton had used it to organize the estate. I hadn't touched it since. Until now. I listed it online with a short, factual caption. Antique executive desk, solid wood, well-preserved, $200, must pick up. It sold within hours. The space it left behind felt like a pulled tooth, sore, empty, but finally clean. It was Elaine who said the word first. You need a sanctuary, she told me over brunch. Not just a fresh coat of paint, a space. She was right. I found the cabin by accident, a 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of a lake an hour from town. Weathered shutters, wraparound porch, a line of pine trees that whispered secrets in the wind. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like possibility. I bought it 3 days later. The first morning I woke there, I opened every window and let the world in. Birds sang from the trees. A breeze swept through the rooms, cool and fragrant with pine. The sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, dappling the floor in gold. I sat barefoot on the porch with a cup of coffee, wrapped in a wool blanket, and exhaled something I hadn't even known I was holding. Elaine visited that weekend. She arrived with a bottle of Prosecco and a loud hello. We sat on the back deck as the sun dipped below the trees, laughing about nothing and everything. "To beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To mine," I replied, clinking hers. Later that night, I unpacked a small leather journal and set it beside my bed. I opened my laptop and stared at the blank document for a long time before typing the first line of a short story I'd carried in my chest for decades. A woman wakes up and doesn't recognize the life around her, so she builds a new one, from scratch. I wrote until my eyes ached. By the time I closed the laptop, I knew. This wasn't the end of anything. This was the start of creation instead of cleanup, the start of self, not service. The cabin became my mirror, honest, unpolished, mine. I planted wildflowers outside the front window, hung my art on the walls without apology, cooked meals without planning for anyone else. I bought a rocking chair for the porch. I read poetry aloud to myself. I lived until he showed up. It was late afternoon, sunlight trickling through the trees, a breeze tugging gently at the curtains. I was sketching on the back deck when I heard gravel crunch under tires. I stood slowly. The truck was unmistakable. Colton. He stepped out before I could move. No smile, just sharp edges and tight fists. "Mom," he said, voice thick, "we need to talk." My stomach dropped. He was here, alone, and he wasn't leaving quietly. Colton stood at the bottom of the cabin steps like a storm, waiting to break. His jaw was set, his fists clenched at his sides. The wind rustled the pine trees around us, but neither of us moved. I didn't invite him in. He stepped up anyway. "You really think this is how families work?" he said, eyes scanning the porch like it offended him. "You run off, rewrite your will, and leave us what? Nothing?" I crossed my arms. "I left you the truth." "That's not what this is," he snapped. "This is revenge." I tilted my head. "Is that what it feels like to you?" He moved closer, eyes narrowing. "You blindsided us. You blindsided me. After everything I did for you. All the years I took care of things while you floated." I stared at him. "Floated?" "You've been checked out since Dad died," he said. "You gave up, and someone had to keep things together. So yeah, I stepped in. And now you treat me like the villain?" "I didn't ask you to take over my life, Colton. I asked for space to live it." He scoffed. "You think this place is living? Hiding out in the woods like you're some misunderstood poet?" "No," I said calmly. "This place is freedom. From expectations I never agreed to. From obligations I never consented to. From you." The words hung between us, raw and sharp. His face cracked then, just for a second. A flicker of something softer underneath the fury. "You don't get it," he said, voice lowering. "You don't see it. I've been carrying this family since I was 15. Since Dad died and you went quiet. You don't know what that was like." "I do," I said. "Because I lived it. I lost him too." He shook his head. "No, you disappeared. I was the one who stepped in. Who kept Harper from falling apart, who made sure Gavin didn't drift off into nothing. You think I wanted that? You think I wanted to be the one making your doctor's appointments and talking to lawyers? Then why didn't you stop?" "Because someone had to." He shouted it like a confession, like a wound he hadn't meant to show. "I was a kid," he continued, his voice cracking. "And you weren't there, not really. So I became Dad. Because I thought that's what would make things okay again. That's what he would have done. That's what he trained me to do." My breath caught. Colton's chest was heaving now. His eyes filled, but he blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "I didn't mean to control you," he whispered. "I just didn't know how else to keep you. Tethered. To us. To me." I stepped back, not out of fear but clarity. And that's the problem, I said. You thought love meant control, that caring meant managing. But I wasn't yours to manage. I was grieving. And I didn't disappear. I just wasn't who you needed me to be anymore. His shoulders slumped. I thought if I kept everything in order, you'd come back. I sat down on the porch chair and gestured for him to sit across from me. He didn't. I know Dad put you on a pedestal, I said. Told you men don't cry, don't question, don't fail. But you were a boy, Colton. A scared boy trying to fix a broken thing. That was never your job. His lips trembled, but his expression hardened again. So what now? You cut us out. Live up here pretending we don't exist? I don't need to pretend, I said. You already acted like I didn't. His silence was answer enough. I don't hate you, I added softly. But I won't let you hurt me anymore. You think I'm the only one who failed you? He asked, voice sharp again. What about Harper? Gavin? Why am I the one standing here? Because you're the one who made sure I'd have no voice, I said. You wrapped your fear in responsibility and turned it into power. You meant well, maybe. But meaning well doesn't undo what's done. He looked away toward the lake. The wind picked up, tugging at the edge of his shirt, ruffling the hair at his temples. Mom, he said, almost pleading, what am I supposed to do with this? You let it go, I said. And you learn to be your own man, not your father's shadow, or mine. We sat in silence for a long time. Then I stood. You're not my keeper, I said, and I'm no longer your prisoner. His face twisted. Pain, disbelief, something he couldn't name. I thought we were a family, he said. We were, I said, but families don't survive on illusion. They survive on truth, and this is mine. He stared at me for a moment longer. Then he turned, walked to his truck, and slammed the door harder than he needed to. Gravel spat under the tires as he reversed out of the driveway. I didn't move until the sound faded. My legs were trembling. I walked back inside, sat on the couch, and stared at the floor. I felt gutted, but also unbound. I cried then, not because I wanted him to stay, not because I regretted the words, but because choosing myself over reconciliation was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and I did it. I chose clarity over comfort, truth over nostalgia, self-respect over the fantasy of family. I wasn't sure what would happen next, if Colton would come back, if Gavin would stay, if Harper would ever reach out. But I knew one thing for certain. I had finally chosen me, and that choice was mine alone to keep. The cemetery was quiet, save for the low whir of distant wind through winter branches. The grass was brittle under my boots. I walked slowly, carrying no flowers, no trinkets, just the weight of things I had never said. Her headstone was simple, just her name, 2 dates, and the words, beloved wife and mother. Nothing more. No testament to her life beyond who she was to others. No space for who she might have wanted to be. I stood there for a long while, staring at the stone like it owed me an answer. I hadn't visited in over a decade, not because I was angry, because I hadn't known what to say. Now I did. I think you did your best, I whispered, but I don't want your life. The wind picked up. We didn't know better, but I do now. And that was it. That was the reckoning. Not rage, not sorrow, just truth. A bridge between us, fragile but real. When I returned to the cabin, the morning light was soft through the windows. I poured a cup of coffee and sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt, listening to birdsong. The world felt closer here, more immediate, less performative. I had no audience, only the rhythm of my own breath and the slow turning of time. Over the next few months, I stitched myself back together. Therapy continued. Dr. Klein and I peeled back more layers of shame, guilt, and mistaken loyalty. I started writing in longer stretches, often at night, wrapped in the quiet. I enrolled in a local writing retreat for women over 50. There, I met others who, like me, had spent their lives in silence and were only now learning how to speak. Nature walks became my morning ritual, not for exercise, for presence. I walked along the lake's edge, let my feet sink into the earth. I stopped to watch deer graze or to sketch a tree bent sideways in the wind. I felt myself becoming part of something again, not society, not family, but life. Gavin visited often. He never stayed long, but he came. We sanded the deck together one Saturday, side by side in companionable silence. He asked if I wanted to repaint the walls. I told him no. I liked the marks and imperfections. They told the truth of this place. He smiled at that. Some evenings we shared soup and old movies. He never asked about the others. He didn't have to. His presence said what they wouldn't. I see you now. Then, one day, a letter came. Harper's handwriting. Clean, controlled. The message was brief. I understand your decision. I won't argue it. I'm not good at this. But I respect your space. I hope you're well. No apology, no invitation, just acknowledgement. It was cold, but it was something. And strangely, it didn't hurt. I no longer needed warmth from those who only knew how to give frost. Instead, I found warmth elsewhere. My neighbors started stopping by more often. Marla with her muffins, James with firewood, Maria with gossip and garden tools. I joined a local book club, then an online writing group. I read stories out loud for the first time in years, and they listened. Really listen. One morning, I caught my reflection in the cabin window. I was standing tall, coffee mug in hand, shoulders relaxed. My eyes no longer darted downward. My voice no longer wavered when I spoke. There was ease in the way I existed now. Confidence, not loud, but real. I wrote my short story in 3 sittings. It was called The Room with No Door, about a woman who woke up one day and realized her life didn't belong to her. So she built a new one, not from escape, but from excavation. She didn't run. She dug. I sent it to a local literary magazine on a whim. Weeks later, an envelope arrived with a gold seal and an embossed header. Congratulations. You've been nominated for the North Coast Regional Prize in Short Fiction. I laughed, not from disbelief, but from recognition, because I knew the woman who wrote that story. I had met her, and she was me. The fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows against the walls, the warmth of its glow licking at the edges of worn photographs and curling pages. She sits cross-legged on the floor, journal in hand, its spine frayed and soft from years of use. Her voice is steady, low like the hum of an old song barely remembered. She reads aloud. Dear Anna, you were my first light. I used to press my ear to my belly and imagine the shape of your laughter. I wanted to be the kind of mother who could shelter you from storms, but I built walls instead of homes. You grew up thinking silence meant safety. I see now that it made you afraid of your own voice. I should have told you more often that it was okay to be angry. That I was angry too, and it didn't make me unlovable. I'm sorry I didn't see you slipping away sooner. I'm proud of the woman you've become, strong enough to walk away when love looked like control. She exhales, the weight of the words lifting just slightly. Her fingers tremble as they turn the page. Dear Caleb, you remind me of the tide, pulling away, crashing back. You always carried more than your share of the burden. I watched you become the man of the house at 12, the quiet protector. I should have stopped you. I should have said, you don't have to save us all. When your hands shook the night you left, I knew it wasn't rebellion. It was survival. I didn't stop you. Not because I didn't care, but because I understood. I hope one day you'll come back, not for me, but for the boy who never got to be just a boy. A long pause. The fire cracks. Her lips part again. Dear Lily, you wore your heart like a badge, bright and obvious. You tried to make peace in a war none of us knew how to end. I remember your little notes. Smile, Mama, scrawled in crayon. I kept them, every single one. You taught me that softness wasn't weakness. I'm sorry I only learned that lesson when you stopped writing them. You deserved a mother who wasn't so tired, so lost in her own grief. I love you for staying. I love you even more for finally choosing to leave. She closes the journal slowly, pressing it against her chest. Her eyes, though glistening, are dry. She reaches for a separate page. It's older, worn differently. Creased down the middle, its edges singed from being held too close to flame more than once. Richard, this is the letter I never wrote, because I knew once I did, I'd have to stop pretending. You hollowed out my dreams and called it love. You turned every tender thing into a test. I bent until my spine forgot what standing felt like. And still, I loved you. I mistook obedience for devotion. I thought if I was good enough, quiet enough, everything would be okay. But the truth is, you didn't want a partner. You wanted a mirror. I broke the day I stopped reflecting you. You gave me 3 beautiful children and a blueprint for their pain. I hate you for what you did. I hate you for what you made me become. But hate is heavy, and I am tired. So this is it, My last offering, my grief, my rage, my silence burned into ash. She stands, walks toward the fireplace. The camera follows the slow motion of her hand reaching out, holding the letter like a sacred thing. She touches it to the flame. It catches quickly, curling into black. Her face doesn't flinch. It softens. I used to believe love was enduring pain, that if you stayed, no matter how much it hurt, that meant it was real. But now I think love is the moment you stop running from yourself. When you forgive the child you were for not knowing better, and the parent you became for not doing better. The letter is gone. The flames settle. Margaret sits back down, the journal still in her lap, but closed now. To my children, I love you. In every way I failed, I hope you find your own way to forgive me. Not because I deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Let my silence end here. Camera lingers on her face, calm, unguarded. Her hands, once clenched, rest gently on her knees. Outside, morning creeps in, a soft blue light brushing the edge of the window frame. Her eyes close, not in grief, but in release. I am not the mother I dreamed of being, but I am no longer the woman he left behind. Fade out. 1 year. That's how long it had been since the old life burned down, and the new one began to grow in its place. Slowly, hesitantly, then with conviction. The cabin was fully rebuilt now, not just in wood and nails, but in rhythm and breath and choice. Every shelf, every color on the wall, every squeaky floorboard was mine. The porch swing creaked gently under me, morning light filtered through pine needles, and birds sang with that unbothered joy only nature seems to understand. I wrapped my fingers around my coffee mug and listened, not for anything in particular, just to hear life moving around me. Inside, hanging neatly on a hook, was the navy blue dress I'd bought for the award ceremony. The North Coast Literary Prize. My name was printed in gold ink on the invitation, alongside the words, honoring voices that reclaim and redefine. It was surreal, flattering. But I wasn't going. Instead, I packed a canvas bag with a blanket, a journal, and a thermos of tea. I left the dress where it was. The beach wasn't far, an hour's drive. I took the winding roads with the windows down, wind in my hair, music low. I didn't need an audience. I needed the ocean. When I arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty. The air held that gentle saltiness I'd missed for years. The tide was low, the waves calm, sunlight dancing over the surface like secrets being whispered. I spread the blanket on the sand and sat, shoes off, journal in my lap. The breeze tugged at the corners of the pages. I opened to the last one. Final entry, I wrote, then paused. The words came slowly, not out of pain anymore, but truth. I wasn't waiting to die. I was waiting to begin. I smiled as I dotted the final period, closed the cover. A shadow crossed over the page. I looked up. Gavin stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes gentle beneath his ball cap. Thought I'd find you here, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You been following me? He grinned. Just guessing. You always talked about the sea like it knew something we didn't. He sat beside me without being asked. We watched the waves for a long time, saying nothing. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. How are you, really? He asked finally. I'm mine, I said. For the first time. He nodded. That's more than most people ever get. We stayed there. Two people bound not by obligation, but something newer. Respect, maybe. Honesty. Eventually, I stood and walked to the edge of the surf. The water was cool, tickling my ankles, drawing me forward in gentle laps. I closed my eyes, felt the sand shift beneath my feet, felt my lungs rise and fall, steady, certain. I wasn't a wife, not anymore. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't what they made of me. I was a woman standing in the surf, salt on her skin, sun in her hair, breathing fully for the first time in decades. The horizon stretched out like a promise, open, undefined, mine. Behind me, Gavin took a photo. Just one. No filters, no captions. Just a moment. I turned, walked back to the blanket, and sat beside him. He handed me the journal. Want to read it to me? He asked. I shook my head. Number it was meant to be written, not explained. He understood. As the sun began its descent, casting everything in gold, we packed up our things. I placed the journal gently in the bag, set the pen on top. The final shot, if someone were filming this, would be just that. An open journal, a pen placed gently across the last page. The rest of the story? unwritten. But finally, mine. Voiceover. Family is who holds your truth, not who holds you hostage. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a fracture, a truth you've buried, don't scroll past it. Share it with someone who still believes silence is love. And stay with us. The next story might just be yours.